Assalamu alaikum, dear students. A very warm welcome to everyone. And today, again, the course title of 19th century English novel that stands for the program of BS English Second. The course code is 3114, and me, Instructor Farah Ashfaq. Today, we're going to discuss a very beautiful lady from the 19th century, which is Charlotte Brunt. One of my favorite and one of the most influential writers of that time. And basically today's discussion is about not only about Jane Eyre, the written manuscript and masterpiece of Charlotte Brand, but also we're going to discuss how she developed herself through the writings. This is one of the important aspect which we can relate in this lecture, that on one side we have Charlotte Brand and on another side we have Jane Eyre, but features are very much similar because Charlotte Brand had tried her level best to accomplish a level of dealing by herself, and the topic and the genre in her mind is the literature, and you can say the feature which she has adopted. We will also discuss this. So it's been a lovely experience when we read Jane Eyre, and even we watch a movie. It contained a full family masala, if you can relate to like an Hindi movie. It contained a complete vision of the writing patterns. So just we'll go with the lines and we'll go with some of the important features of Charlotte Brand, and as well as about the story, how she grew with the lines, how she maintained herself with the lines, and how she developed herself with the features. So we'll discuss all of these features. So let's talk about Charlotte Brand first, and then we'll discuss the main features of the writings about her, and the personality about her. So today the discussion level is about Jane Eyre, and Jane Eyre is one of you can say the picking uh, tendency by that beautiful lady, and another writings wallet that was also famous. But Jane Eyre contained one of the most favorite, you can say, popularity, and it was published in 1847. And after that she didn't just look back, she didn't felt that her struggle is in vain. So that's a beautiful masterpiece by her, and throughout her life she is still remembered as the writer of Jane Eyre, and afterwards she just made a success on that behalf. If we discuss the history of Jane Eyre and of Charlotte Brand, uh, we'll go with the story, and I'll make you understand. You can go on any Google related search engine where you can find out that the story of Jane Eyre and the story of Charlotte Brand, that is quite relatable, and that is quite you can say matchable history, because Charlotte Brand and Jane Eyre, these are the same names with literary and with real differences. So these are all same. So about the author, a very decent lady, and she was born on 1816, and 1815 was the last year when she died during a childbirth process. And she belonged to the English novelist class, and she was also a poet. I have also added a poetry element of her, and she was the eldest of three Brunt sisters, and who survived into adulthood, and even their novels became classics in the English literature, like Emily and of Anne, Wuthering Heights, and other writings. They were also very famous. So she belonged to Haworth, England, and still she is at St. Michael Church, Haworth, England, after her death. And the pen name of that lady stands for Currer Bell, and she worked as a novelist, she worked as a poet, and she also worked as a governess. And the nationality was of a British lady, and the basic genre belonged to her, that is fiction and poetry. And notable work again, I'm quoting it again, that is Jane Eyre and Violet. And other writings are also there, but the famous one are related elements are there. So she is one of the intelligent, you can say, students in her life, when she was 14 years of age, and when she was with her sisters like Emily and Anne. And she just worked hard. And her father was also a very noble person. He was a caretaker of the church area, and the church was quite adjacent to their house. And both the character of father and daughter, that was very good, and that was very humble. And she led a very quiet life. She was not a rebellious woman, she was not a high tempered woman, she was a very generous woman, she was a very noble woman. Sorry. And she just contained that personality till her last breath. She maintained that level. So I have a very clear image of Charlotte Brunt. If you have any confusion through my expression of voice, so Charlotte Brunt, Coral Bell, the pen name, their date of birth is there, then place of birth is there, and the date of death is there. And father, as you can see in the picture, he was a very noble clergy person. And she was just 5 when she lost her mother. And Maria and Elizabeth, they were the elder sisters of Charlotte Brand, but they died, and they died very mysteriously, specifically the character of Maria. And they just died in the convent school. And it's been related that maybe that Maria was tortured by the school teacher. That's why she committed suicide. And many other people have different views about Maria and her mental level. And afterwards, when she wrote about Jane Eyre, she just moved into the London circles, because London at the time was famous as the business circle area, as the industrial city. So everything belonged to development was Britain. So she just went over there. And after losing her siblings at a very young age, because all of the family members died due to tuberculosis, and due to some kind of a form of cancer at the time. And there was no cure for that ailment, like John Keats died due to tuberculosis. And at that time there was no curement disease, you can say, medicine available at that time. So after losing everyone, Brunt married a clergy person. The name was Arthur Bill Nicholas. And the father was against that man, because he knew that that marriage wouldn't go long. And in just age of 38, during the first pregnancy process, she died. And a very bitter reality to save and to face about that lady. So that was quite bitter from her session. So talking about Bell and Brunts. That was a title for three of the sisters. You can observe in the picture, a very beautiful picture drawn, just sketched by a painter, about Charlotte and about Emily and about Anne. So three of the sisters, they were quite good friends with each other, and they always had a good bonding of relation with each other. And they always felt a close bounding of literary touch for each other. So the Brunt sisters, they are the name of 19th century literary family, and they were born in the village of Thornton and later associated with the village of Haworth and in the West Riding of Yorkshire. Three of the sisters. So the sister Charlotte, the first sister, 1816 to 1855. Then Emily is there, second sister. She was born on 1818 and she died on 1848, just before just Charlotte Brunt. And Anne, she was born on 1820 and died on 1849. A very young death of both of these sisters, and the death reason is quite clear that they died due to that disease elements, and they died in a very tender age. So both three of the sisters, they are known as poets and novelists, and like many contemporary female writers, they originally published their poems and novels under male pseudonyms like the name of Currer and Alice and Acton Bell. So the stories by them immediately attached and attracted the people. And Charlotte Brunt's Jane Eyre was very famous. Emily's Wuthering Heights was very famous, and Anne's The Tenants of Wild Fell Hall, that was also a very famous work by her. So the three sisters worked a lot for this, and they are called the masterpieces of 19th century English novel. And as we talk about further about them, the three sisters and their brother Burnwell. Normally, people don't think about the brother, but after and before the daughters, Maria and the clergy person Brunt, they had just one son that was Bonwell, and he was born on 1817 and just died on 1848. That created a huge depression on the personality of Charlotte Brunt, and they were very close. And during the childhood, their development and the imaginations, first through oral storytelling and plays set in an intricate imaginary world, and then through the collaborative writing of increasingly complex stories set therein. So the deaths of first their mothers and then their older sisters marked them profoundly and influenced their writing, as did the relative isolation in which they were raised. The Brunt birthplace in Thornton's a place of pilgrimage and later home as a personage of Yorkshire, where Brunt Personage Museum is there, and thousands of people visited each year that place because there is a kind of strong relation or discussion about these three sisters, and I think without them 19th century English novel wouldn't be that one which we actually imagine and which we actually understand. So about Jane Eyre, what was the perception of Charlotte Brunt, that was actually published on 16th of October 1847, and just a very close time of her death and the time of her writing masterpiece, and she didn't get a proper time to enjoy her famousness and enjoy her you can say success. That was a very short time. So about Jane Eyre, she had a very beautiful line that the soul fortunately has an interpreter, often an unconscious, but still a truthful interpreter, and that is the eye. So about Jane Eyre, she believed uh, that expression, they are all about the interpretation of your mind and interpretation of your personality, and that is contained through your unconscious level, but mostly your eye told everything because your eye is a reflection of your personality. So, a childhood time about Jane Eyre, because Jane Eyre and Charlotte Brown, they are quite similar. So I'm just mixing both of the names, but you won't get confused because if we read about Jane Eyre, you will believe that you're talking about Charlotte Brand. And if you are reading about Charlotte Brand, so you will got to know that if you had thoroughly gone through with Jane Eyre, you will understand that Charlotte Brand is a complete story of the sketch written by Charlotte Bronte in form of Jane Eyre. So childhood that was passed in inflexible school, and she was under the guidance of a governess, and Jane's dearest friend Helen Russ, that was also a real-time friend of Charlotte Brand. She died of tuberculosis in Lowood School. Lowood is an imaginary name, but actually she had learned in a convent school, and she had a good friend, and but she died due to the tuberculosis process, and that recalls the death of Charlotte's sister at Cowan Bridge, because the death of Helen is quite relatable with the death of Maria, and she was very much touched by that death level, and nobody knew, because the death of Maria is still a mystery. It was a murder, it was a suicide attempt. What has happened to her? That is quite, even in Jane Eyre in chapter 9, she has added some lines for Maria, and because she loved her family a lot, and after the death of Elizabeth and Maria, Charlotte Brunt became a mother figure for the other two sisters like Emily and Anne, but they also died before her, and that was a very broken heart reality for her. So the hypocritical religious fervor of headmaster Mr. Brooklehurst, who remember Reverend Carus Wilson, the evangelical minister of Cowanbridge. So again, uh, sorry, the situation of character Brooklehurst, that was also imaginary but a real character in the life of Charlotte Brown. So the dissolute life of John Reed, the cousin of Jane, the Bronwell, the brother of Charlotte. So situation is same. Bronwell was again that type of rascal person, cousin, like in the story of Jane, the cousin name was John Reed. So this character is also a real character, and that thing created some kind of confidence and some kind of you can say retaliation in the personality of Charlotte Brand. So the figure of governess, which was the job of both Charlotte and Jane, again totally matchable biographical feature, that Charlotte also worked as governess as Jane worked as a governess in the story of Jane Eyre, and the love for a man of an high school class, Arthur Bell Nicholas for Charlotte, and Edward Rochester for Jane. So even the marriage concept and the pursuit of marriage, that was also similar, like in the character of Arthur Nicholas and the character of Edward Rochester for Jane. So that was quite similar. So again, how many similar points we have? The character of husband, the character of being governess, the character of the cousin in form of John Reed, the rascal and the cheap school caretaker in form of Mr. Brooklehurst, and the death of Helen, best friend, and the death of Maria, her sister. So these were five features. They are quite relatable in Jane Eyre. So it's very easy to just understand the personality of Charlotte Brand through Jane Eyre. It's very easy to understand this feature. So, Wuthering Heights, that was published in 1847, a very landable work by Emily Brunt, and Tale of Love, that was also a good work by Emily, and Passion, Death and Revenge, that was also very famous work by her, and from where she found her inspiration. She found her inspiration from the moorlands and the architecture of the Yorkshire area, as well as the personal experience of illness and death. Because she was ill, she couldn't stand well due to the process of such disease. So that thing created a kind of attraction in Emily towards literature and literary writing. So Wuthering Heights was the time when she got one of the most popular place in literary writing. So themes which she had covered, because when we are talking about Charlotte Brand, it will be unjustified not to talk about Emily and Anne Brunt. So themes were nature, cruelty, social position, and indestructibility of the spirit. That was the same features you can find out in the work of Charlotte Brand too, because the sisters had the similar mind of, you can say, vision. They had the similar point of views on life, and they were very close to each other in this feature. So another autobiographical images of the place where Brunt sisters grow up and wrote all of their novels. So this is a place of Haworth. So in the first picture, there are the tomb areas, and in front of that, there's the house of Brunt sisters, and another one is of the church next to their house where their father worked as a clergyman, and mother died at a very early stage, and father played a very important and essential role in the encouragement of the daughters to write. And still you can have in form of museum, you can find out their rooms. They were well decorated at that time. Their dresses, they were marvelous. And because the clergyman, he spent a lot of time and a lot of money on his daughter, and he just tried that daughters of him uh, gonna have good name in any field. So the Brand sister choose the literary writing field. So father support was always there, but as we can understand, in 19th century that was not allowable feature for ladies to publish anything with their original name. So they just adopted a male name and the sodiums of male oriented names for their writings. But in spite of all things, they got popularity, and you can't say they belong to a poor family. They belong to a very settled type of family, because still their relics and still their, you can say, the lefted items are still in fashion, and people do observe their talents. And not only they were satisfied from the financial source of thing, they were also very much satisfied from the emotional level. But the death ratio, a sudden death ratio within the family, that actually disturbed the feature of Charlotte Brunt mind, and she was totally depressed about this feature, and that thing created a strong bonding of her writing. So this is a chart of, you can say, their family. Patrick and Maria, the father and mother of Charlotte Brand, and Maria and Elizabeth, they died in a very, very early age. Just you can observe the age 1814 and 1825, hardly 11 years or 13 years of age, and they just got died. And just 13, 14 years of age of him of them. And afterwards Charlotte Brent was there. Then Patrick Bonwell, he also died in 1848. Emily died in 1848 and died in 1849. So a very close time of death by the family of Brunts. And the true observability by Charlotte Brunt was that she observed the death of her family. That was quite, you can say, a point of uh, pain and point of depression by Charlotte Brunt, and that was not acceptable by her. That's why she also died in 1855, because she never accepted this reality, and she just moved with this pain. And after the marriage was also not a good phenomena. That was not a success. So after her, 1861 was there when her father died. So throughout her life, she suffered a lot, and that suffering is quite relatable in Jane Eyre. So the Brunt sisters, uh, again, for the remembering and the remembrance of names, Emily wrote about Wuthering Heights. Charlotte was popular due to Jane Eyre, and Anne was popular for the tenants of Wild Fell Holloway. So Three of the sisters were famous due to their writing, and one should remember that thing for their intellectual point of view. One should always remember the name of Brunt sisters and their cooperation and their death ages, because some of the time they are also asked in your competitive exams. So one should be very clear in their description. So here I have a writing of Jane Charlotte Brunt, and Speak of the North, A Lonely Moor. That was a poetry in a very young age, and this poetry was a kind of attraction for her father Patrick. And from there, he decided that I will do my level best for my daughters to conceive that level where they can write well. And by reading this piece of poetry, he provided the level best encouragement to his daughters, and he just promised that, and he fulfilled his promise. So it's a very beautiful poem. You can go with the lines. It's marvelous to read such marvelous thing. So speak of the north, a lonely moor, silent and dark and trackless wells. The discussion of moors is quite relatable with Emily, and because she just wrote about the moorlands. So the waves of some wild streamlet pour hurriedly through its ferny dells. So profoundly still the twilight air, lifeless the landscape. So we dream till like a fathom gliding near, a stag bends down to drink the stream. Afar away, a mountain zone, a cold, wild waste of snow drifts lies, and one star, large and soft and lone, silently lights the unclouded skies. A very beautiful rhythmic poem by Charlotte Brunt in a very early age. I think she was in school, in a governess school, when she just wrote this masterpiece, and her father got attracted by this feature, and he hurriedly decided that from this point she will have all the necessary elements for the writing pattern. So this is the chapter number 9, which I have added for your discussion and for the style of Charlotte Brand, because these lines are dedicated to the death of Maria, because she loved her sister a lot, and how she died accidentally, and how she observed the death of her. That is quite beautiful through these lines. Actually, these lines were written in the story to Helen, but in actuality, they are dedicated to her sister. So, this is chapter number 9. You can go with the original text, you can find out the lines. So, she just tried to portray the death features of her uh, sister very well. So I still recoiled at the dread of seeing a corpse. I saw a corpse of Helen, actually of Maria. I whispered softly, "Are you awake?" She stirred herself, put back the curtain, and I saw her face, pale, wasted, but quite composed. She looked so little changed that my fear was instantly dissipated, because the change was very minute, because the disease level in the Brunt family, that was quite fast. But elements like the patient of cancer, he or she looked very healthy from the outside, but from the inner side, the cancer cells, they are eating them. So from the face, she was looking quite calm and quite handsome, quite beautiful, but internally she was dead. So can it be you, Jane? That was a voice of Maria when she just saw that her sister is there for her. So it just named as, "Is it you, Jane?" So she asked in her warm, gentle voice. "Oh, I thought she's not going to die." So that was a feature of Charlotte Brunt, that she's not going to die. She remembered me. how one can say that she's dying? So they're mistaken. She couldn't speak and look so calmly if she were. So Charlotte Brunt was least informed of believing that her sister is dying now. She didn't believe on this thing because she knew that maybe she is ill and she's suffering with the disease, and maybe she will recover very soon. So I got on to her crib and kissed her. So Charlotte Brunt get closer to her and just showed her love and passion being a sister. So her forehead was cold and her cheek both cold and thin, and so were her hand and wrist, but she smiled as of old because she was a elder sister. So she has to smile. She has to portray that there is nothing to worry, my little ducky sister. There is nothing to worry because I'm healthy and I'm not pale. I can handle myself. I can go with my theme. So you don't have to worry because I'm elder and I have to show always that I am quite well. So I can't say that I'm suffering from such kind of disease. So Charlotte's works, in just one glimpse, uh, from paper point of view and from the MCQ's point of view, you can have the understanding. So 1847, Jane Eyre; 1849, Shirley; 1853, Violet. That was the last, you can say, writing in her life that was published, because afterwards 1505 was the death time of Charlotte Brunt. 57, The Professor, posthumous publication. 1925, The 12 Adventures of Other Stories, another posthumous event. And 71, The Legends of Angria. So four writings were after her death and three writings were within her life. So one of the most popular work was Jane Eyre, Violet, and afterwards Professor got popularity, and 12 Adventures, that was also a very remarkable work by her. So these days should be remembered specifically of Jane Eyre, of Violet, and of the Professor. So these are very remarkable work by her in her life. So the key facts of Charlotte Brunt in the Jane Eyre. So what are the key factors? Because the discussion of lecture is about the personality, style, and the feature of Charlotte Brunt. The topic is actually about. We are not discussing about Jane Eyre, and we are not discussing profoundly about the story of Jane Eyre. No, we are not concerned with this. We are concerned with the relativity of literary writing with the writer. So these features should be very clear in your mind. So Jane Eyre, Victorian age, because Charlotte Brent also belongs to that age. Publication 1847, title full autobiographical is there, and genre is Victorian novel time, gothic mystery, romantic marriage is there, and coming of age story, plot making is perfect in there. Setting is in England and where she lived throughout her life, and protagonist is Jane Eyre, means you can say another name is Charlotte Brand. So the anti characters are Mrs. Reed, so another is Bertha Mason and the John Rivers. So these are the most crucial characters in the life of Jane Eyre. And point of view, as a first person, Jane recounts the story 10 years after its ending. So 10 years lapses there, and she just took that feature of time lapsing because that will contain, I think, a lot of literary pages, because life of Charlotte Brand is very huge and is very detailed one to read and believe about. So she just has to follow the point of view, the recounting session, so that she can go hurriedly with the vision of her throughout in her writing. So historical background, how Charlotte Brand and Jane are, they are relatable, they are understandable with each other. So Jane Eyre is a set in the north of England, and in the first half of the 19th century, and again relatable to Charlotte Brand. And during this period, British society was undergoing slow but significant change. Perhaps most apparent was a transition from a ruler to an industrial economy, as I had told you earlier, because Britain was at that time the key area of industry. So the Industrial Revolution had begun in Britain in the late 1700, but by the time of Jane Eyre, it was running full steam when Charlotte Brunt was there. So although Charlotte wrote about some of the effects of Industrial Revolution in her novel Shirley, and she touches areas of social concern in Jane Eyre, education, women's employment, marriage, concept of love, class differences, social differences, people understanding's point of view. So these are the very common features utilized by, as you could talk about Jane Austen, as you could talk about Charlotte Bronte. So both of these ladies took this feature very seriously, and specifically the difference of social class, how they just affect the mindset of the people. So summary of Jane Eyre, that is quite relatable with Charlotte Brant. So novel begins at the gates head hall, and the time lapse is of 10 years, and you can observe Jane Eyre, she is 10 years of age, because as we had discussed earlier, that time lapse is there. So 10 years is there, Jane Eyre is there in form of Charlotte Brand, and she is living with her mother's brother's family, and that was not real actually, because she was living with her family. So the brother Mr. Reed, that is quite original. Cousin of her, he was also a very cheap kind of person, and the John Reed, the character of cousin, that is quite similar with her original life. So Mr. Reed dies shortly after adopting Jane, and he was a good person. And his wife, Mrs. Sarah Reed, she was not a good person, and their three children, John, Eliza, and Georgina, neglect and abuse Jane because of the preference that his uncle had for her, because she was a very nice and humble girl. That's why Mr. Reed always loved her, and that was a panic point for Mrs. Reed throughout her life. So her female cousins, Georgina and Aunt Eliza, tolerate but didn't love her. That was reality. So their brother, like John, he was very hostile to Jane, and one day he is angered to find Jane reading one of his books. So he takes the books away and throws it at her. So, finding this kind of intolerable treatment, Jane fires back. So, that was the period. If we observe the personal life of Charlotte Brand, the behavior, and specifically, you can observe the death of her family members in a very early stage, that quite deteriorated her vision, that quite deteriorated her personality. But she uplifted her vision, and she uplifted her personality to an extent that she wanted to show that I'm a strong woman, and I can retaliate and I can fight. So negative character in the story, one is Mrs. Reed. She's a very beautiful lady, and you can have her picture. I just love the picture of Mrs. Reed. I don't know who has picturized or sketched this, but it's a beautiful. And another negative character was Mr. Brooklehurst, and he was a lousy supervisor of Lowood, and he was responsible for the starving, for making the girls starved over there, and thinks that God is very cool with him, and with the family, which he supposed that he has a family in Lawwood place. Why the character of Mr. Brooklehurst is important? Because one day Mrs. Reed, what she did, just to get revenge from Jane Eyre, she just punished that girl because she read a book of John Reed, and she was punished to live in the room of Mr. Reed, and there was a belief that Mr. Reed's ghost is still there, and that was a room in the color of redness. The room was very red in display. So for the whole night she was over there, and in morning she was found unconscious. And doctor came over there, and the doctor suggested to Mrs. Reed to just leave that girl in a in a convent school, so where she can read and where she can learn and she can stay away from the house. So the convent school or the reading place that was decided for her, that was the school and convent place of Mr. Brooklehurst. So from one negative character, she was pushed to live with another negative character, and he was a very you can say cheap and very you can say sluggish kind of person, and he was a very negative, full of negativity. The character was full of negativity, and that thing created a huge change in the personality of Jane Eyre at that time. And over there, she just found a very good friend of her life, that was Helen. And the Helen is the literary name of Maria, her daughter, her sister, her actual sister. So from one negative character, she was pushed to live with another negative character. So that was a very brutal, you can say, end of Jane Eyre's life, from school to house and from house to school. So that was a very bitter end of her house journey from the house of Mrs. Reed. Now, dear students, the story developed with the character. In spite of so much difficulties faced by Jane Eyre in the school of Lawwood, where she was, sorry, becoming governess, she found a friend over there, Helen Burns, and a day was there. Then Brooklehurst insulted Jane Eyre a lot, and she was insulted badly by Brooklehurst. He just made Jane Eyre to stand on a chair, and he just uttered some very ridiculous dialogue, that you see the girl, she's young, she's beautiful, she looks like an ordinary child, but you know she's a wicked girl, and children should stay away from her, and beware of this lady, she is not a good girl, and she didn't had a good soul, and not a good body, not only a good body, but she didn't contain a good soul too. So that was a very terrible condition for Jane Eyre, and that insult is quite related with the life of Maria when she committed suicide. Maybe I'm wrong in my perception, but she died very mysteriously. So there is a saying that maybe she committed suicide due to such insulted behavior of that master over there, and he just insulted that girl a lot. That's why in a very tender age she just lost all her hopes, and she just committed suicide. And or maybe if she didn't committed suicide, maybe sorry, she did something which made an end to her life. Another drastic event in the story of Jane Eyre, that was the death of Helen Burns, and in the real life of Charlotte Brunt, that was the death of Maria Brunt, and she died. She was hardly 13 to 14 years of age, and in story there was a situation when Jane was made and made an attempt to just clarify her personality, and Brooklehurst was accused due to that, but in reward or in accusation he didn't stop, but he just prevailed poverty and privation in the majority of the school students, and half of the students died due to typhus epidemic, and Helen Burns was one of them. So Maria or Helen Burns, you can just replicate these names, but the end was that sister of her was no more with her, and that thing created a hollowness in the life of Charlotte Brunt, and that created some kind of strength even in her writings, and she just composed herself in writing patterns. Sorry. So that was a turning point as well as a understanding point for the life of Charlotte Brand. So afterwards, she became a complete governess, and in the story, she moved from a place to the house of Mrs. Alice Fairfax, the house keeper over there, and she was supposed to teach a French girl over there named Adelaide, and she didn't knew that over there her life had gonna changed a lot. Now 8 years have been passed. In the start, you have been made understand that 10 years are passed, and now 8 years have been passed. And Jane is now a teacher, like Charlotte Brand. She was also a teacher, governess at that time, and she taught at Lowood uh, area for 2 years. And Charlotte Brand did the same thing for the same institute where her sister had died. But Miss Temple, she got married, and she decided to leave the Lowood, and she advertises for a governess, and she was then hired by Mrs. Alice Fairfax as a housekeeper of the manor of Thornfield, and eventually she went over there. But over there, she found the real life hero of her life in the story, that was Nicholas. Sorry, that was Richardson, and in the original life of Charlotte Brand, that was Nicholas, and that was found by her. So a few months, that's the picture of a story. That's not totally relatable with Charlotte Brand, but somehow they met accidentally, and that thing is clearly portrayed and imaginized in the Jane Eyre story. So at Thornfield, Jane was in the woods for a walk, and she just saw a man fall from a horse, and he was a very rude person. At first, that person used to call Jane Eyre as a witch, but she helps him in reward, and on return home to Thornfield, Jane discovered that this horseman is actually the actual employer, Mr. Edward Rochester, and he is charismatic, he is beautiful, handsome, but moody, and he's a good gentleman, and he's nearly 20 years older than Jane. That was a problem in the real life of Charlotte Brand and Nicholas too, because Patrick, the father of Charlotte Brand, he didn't like Nicholas, and he clarified and he clearly said to Charlotte Brand that I don't want you to get married with this man. I don't want that. But still, if you insist, it's your life, it's your decision, but I won't support you because this is not a good decision from your side. So the same night, this is a story pattern that was in Jane Eyre, that she just heard about some laughters and from the Rochester's room, and that was actually the mad wife of Rochester. And Rochester got married with a lady. That was a marriage of convenience because he needs money, he needs some status in the society. So that's why his family supported him to get married to that mad lady. But eventually, Rochester and Jane fall in love, and they didn't show to anyone that they are in love because being governess, sorry, it was not allowed able to a governess to marry their own honor. That was quite you can say malicious act at that time. That was a stigma of shame at that time. If Rochester is getting married with the governess, the house nurse over at that time, so that was quite unacceptable. That's why they just kept it hidden and didn't show to anyone. But the mad wife of Rochester, she was attracted to this reality. She was fully aware of this thing, and she had this in her mind. And but another uh, male like female character, Grace Paul, was there. She was also a maid over there, and she was a very bulky woman, and from the face she looked like that she is a male, but she was a very good, you can say, maid of that mad woman of Rochester. And she just kept that lady on the upstairs, and she didn't allow her to go downstairs. And it was a famous story over there that maybe some kind of spirit is over there. That's why they adopted a governess in the shape of Jane Eyre, so that Adelaide, the daughter of Rochester, and that mad lady, they will have a good future, because Adelaide was not mad, and Rochester was very close to his daughter, and he wants that his daughter should have a good future, a good life in reward. So soon after the fire incident, what was a fire incident? Symbolic incident happened over there, and what was that? The mad wife of Rochester, she turns to fire the bed in the room of Rochester, and luckily Jane had made a good attempt to save Rochester's life, and that created a close connection between both of them. But Mr. Rochester, there was a party in that house, and he leaves the Thornfield, and when he returns in a party of high class ladies and gentlemen, Miss Blanche Ingram, a very beautiful and charming and very clever lady, arrived at that party, and she interrupted again and again the Rochester's gestures, and she just wanted attraction from Rochester. When Jane's turn comes, the gypsy tells her a great deal about her life and feelings, much to Jane's surprise. Because if you can observe in a party of English people, they just dance in a group, and male and females got changed in the ball party sessions. So when the partner of Jane was changed, she got to know about the story of Rochester. How is he, and how is he in disguise? And he's a clever person, and he is, you can say, a playboy maybe. So many things were rumored over there about Rochester's personality. So that night, after a piercing scream wakes everyone in the house, Mr. Rochester asks Jane to help him. Certain Mr. Richard Mason, he was a brother of that mad woman, the wife of Rochester. An Englishman from the West Indies had been stabbed and beaten in the arm. Again, Rochester hints that Grace Paul is responsible for that event, but why he was stabbed, Mr. Richard Mason, because Rochester didn't want anyone to know about that mad wife of him, and he wants that this thing should be hidden, and this thing should be overshadowed by the people, from the people, and nobody could discuss this feature. So Jane returns to Gateshead because her aunt, and because of her aunt condition, now the daughters were not helping her, and now that cruel lady remembered her servant, Jane Eyre, that she should come back to her. And Mrs. Reed gives Jane a letter that she had previously hidden out of spite. The letter is from the father of Jane's brother, John Eyre, notifying of his intent to leave a great fortune upon his death. After Jane's return to Thornfield, she and Rochester gradually revealed their love for each other, because Jane was very clear in her feelings, she was very clear in her emotions. So she clarified her place to Rochester, and he accepted the love affection of Jane Eyre for him. and they just openly just vitalize their feelings for each other. So when both of them were at the step of getting married, till now, Jane Eyre was unaware of the fact that his wife is still alive, and she's living in the house because she was not allowed to go upstairs. So nobody knew about this. But at the time of marriage, this thing was just just you can say that was revealed. The secret was revealed over there due to Richard Mason over there, and at that time Rochester was declared as a liar, but he tried his level best to prove to Jane Eyre that believe me on this fact, that I don't want to tell you because I don't want to hurt you. So a great conspiracy created over there, and Jane just stopped to made that final decision whether to get married to that lied person or not. So the wedding goes ahead, but during the ceremony in the church, Mr. Mason did that kind of stupidity, and he just declared the mad woman in the house who's been laughing all day, and Grace Poole who's been taking care of that person. She is no one but Rochester's mad wife, and she's responsible for the strange events at that place. So all the secrets were revealed, and now that was all on Jane Eyre, what she decided after that. So Jane decides to escape from Thornfield. That was a final decision by Jane Eyre. She just decided to leave that place because she don't want further, you can say, conspiracies, and she don't want further, you can say, accusations to be faced further about her personality. She sleeps outdoors on the moors and begs for food in the villages that she meets along the way. For several days she just kept with this feature. One night, freezing and starving, she begged for help at Moore's house, and St. John Rivers, the young clergyman who lives in the house, decides to help her. So that was a turning point for the life of uh, Jane Eyre. She just accepted the proposal, and she just moved to that place. Jane, who gives the false name of Iliad, uh, her name was changed over there, quickly recovers under the care of St. John and his two sisters, Diana and Mary. St. John finds a job for Jane. She will teach in a charity school for girls in the village of Mort. So her life was again settled because she had nothing bad in her heart throughout her life. So things just changed for her very quickly, and that was again a very relatable factor with the life of Charlotte Brunt, how she just moved with the life's pattern in her later life. So on snowy night, St. John unexpectedly at Jane's cottage, and to find out the Jane's true identity, he tells her about Jane's experiences at Thornfield and says that her uncle John Eyre has died and left him a fortune of £20,000. And after confessing her true identity, Jane decides to share her inheritance with the Rivers, who turn out to be her cousins. That was a big, you can say, a sharing of life by Jane to the family of River, St. John River. That was a very good act, being a character for the family of Saint Rivers. So Saint John had decided to travel to India and devote his life to missionary work, and he asked Jane to accompany him as his wife. So Jane consents first to go to India, but she kindly refuses to marry him because they are not in love. That was a turning but understandable point because Jane still loved Rochester, and she didn't want anyone in her life except Rochester. So that was something turning, but as well as close to the autobiographical element of Charlotte Brunt. Charlotte Brunt, in spite of so many, you can say, neglection of his father, and even after so many allegations, Still, Charlotte Brunt was with Nicholas, and she decided finally to get married to that person. So St. John continues to pressure Jane to marry him, almost convinced her at the time by St. John's reasons. She hears Rochester's voice calling her name, and this gives her the strength to reject St. John's completely. Because Rochester was mad about Jane Eyre, and the true feelings of Rochester was conveyed to Jane Eyre, and that was the same story in the real life of Charlotte Brant too. So the next day, Jane decides to go back to Thornfield, but she finds only grey ruins where the house once stood, because whole of the house were set on fire, and that was all due to the mad woman, the mad wife of Rochester. And she just did the whole thing. An innkeeper tells that Rochester's mad wife set on fire and committed suicide by jumping from the roof. Rochester saved the servants from the burning mansion but lost a hand and his eyesight. He now lives in an isolated manor house called Frindon. But even though Jane Eyre accepted uh, the character of Rochester, and she believed him, and she decided to just live with that person. So, going to a friend in, Jane reunites with Rochester at first, and he fears that she will refuse to marry a blind or disfigured man. But Jane accepts him without any kind of hesitation, because that was the personality of Charlotte Bronte. She never ever just think about any feature that physical disparity can overlap any relation. So she, in spite of any kind of allegation, and that was basically from his her father, Patrick, but she accepted, and she just pursued with the theme of love with Mr. Rochester. So now I have been married for 10 years. So that is a turning point. Again, time lapse quality by Charlotte Brand. I know what is it like to love and to be loved. So no woman has ever been closer to her husband than I am to Edward. I am my husband's life and he is mine. We are always together and have never had enough for each other's company. After 2 years, his sight began to return in one eye. So now he can see a little. And when our first child was born and put into his arm, he was able to see the boy had inherited his fine, large black eyes. Mrs. Fairfax is retired now, and Ashley has grown into a charming young woman. Diana and Mary are both married now, and we visit them once a year. So St. John achieved his ambition by going to India as planned, and he's still there. He writes to me regularly, and he is still unmarried and will never marry now because Jane has rejected him. And he was also a good person, St. John Rivers. He's not a bad person. And he also decided not to get married and just spend his whole life to the missionary missions. So he knows that the end of his life is near, but he has no fear of death and looks forward to gain his place in heaven. So that was a beautiful end of Jane Eyre. Again, a quality of Charlotte Brand that put a story on a very good end, not like Thomas Hardy, not like any other, you can say, pessimistic writers. She always did a best end to the writings, and her real life was not like that, which we can imagine. Her real life was very much disturbed, and just after marriage, in the childbirth of the first child, she got died, and a very pitiable situation for that lady. But eventually the novel end was very good. That was very close to the heart of every reader, but eventually, in real life, the end was very bitter. That was the ending death of Charlotte Brunt, and afterwards, father of her also died after some years. So these are some references. You can quote your additional data from these links. And if you have any query, any question, you can talk to me very frankly. And if there is any suggestion for the discussion, you are most welcome. Thank you so much. Allah Hafiz.